So that he could ride in a cardboard box and we could slide him up and down the stairs. There's enough difference in our age that we had a lot of fun. My brother and I were in our mid-teens, and when Kevin arrived on the scene, he was a very, very welcome addition. We lived very, very close to where Kevin and his family did. Our mothers are sisters, and so Kevin has been a big part of my life for, well, ask him how old he is, and that'll give you an indication how long I have known him very well. And it's kind of fun to come up north here now and see Kevin and his son Steve. I was looking through some family pictures very recently, and sure enough, I saw a picture of Steve and Carla when they were about the age of Brianna and Victoria. So I can say that I have been acquainted with the Wykes for a large part of my life and all of theirs. It's also nice to have Jim Miller joining us this year. Jim is a fellow Californian. He lives just 1 mile from my place. And though we have enjoyed each other's companionship for a period of time now, he's a retired businessman that came from the southern part of the state. It's nice to experience Jim in a different light up here in the North Country where it's always sunny and warm and it's never cold. I wish. I noticed in the bulletin that there is a reference made for the offering that is going to be going to ADRA. When I think of ADRA, I reflect back to about 1997 when I had an opportunity of spending a couple of weeks in the country of Nepal. And that was on an ADRA trip, Adventist Development and Relief Organization. We spent some time working in a leper colony over there and working at Sheer Memorial Hospital, another one of the many travels that I've had the privilege of taking over the years. But this morning I'd like to reflect for just a few moments on the country of Honduras. I have a few pictures that I'm going to share with you, and I assume the mic is on, and so I'm going to more or less take my place down a little bit closer to the audience here so that I can at least look around and find out what it is that you are seeing. Honduras is a country that is part of a group of countries in Central America. It's a very, very interesting country. While sitting in the Combine last fall, my cell phone rang, and typically it's either Steve or Kevin or somebody there, Linda, Carl occasionally, giving us some directions as to where we are going for lunch or where this particular tractor, truck, whatever has to be relocated to. But it was a call from David Noble, who is the president of Maranatha Volunteers International. And David Noble asked me a very quick and simple question. He said, "Richard, would you and Rochelle be interested in leading a group to Central America towards the end of the year?" My wife and I thought for at least 2 seconds before we gave them an enthusiastic yes, we would love to. And so right before Christmas, the week before Christmas, a group of 46 of us left the United States. They weren't all Yankees. We had a number of Canadians along on that trip. And we flew south to Texas and then on to Tegucigalpa, which is the capital city of Honduras. And from there, we boarded a bus and we spent 4 hours as we traveled to a small community, actually not a small community. For those cities, it's kind of hard to say where the city ends and the country begins. We went to a town called Choluteca. And Choluteca is located on the southwestern part of the country of Honduras. Honduras is a very productive country. It's a very hot country. And especially when you leave in December, when you are used to at least the colder parts of the year, you find yourself in a tropical climate where the temperature can reach 100 degrees or very close to it, and it was that way just about the entire time that we were there. There's a couple of facts about Honduras that I'll just share with you briefly. Two in particular that were not shared with us before we left. Number one, Honduras is the murder capital of the world, per capita basis. They didn't tell us about that. I don't know that it would have changed my ideas about Honduras or going there. And the second fact that they shared, and being an old pilot myself, I've had my license now for over 50 years, It is the most dangerous commercial airport in the world. In fact, the U.S. military has banned all of its aircrafts from landing in that particular country and on that particular airport. And flying in there, you can understand why. As you dip the wings on the aircraft and so forth, you get very, very close to some of the apartment buildings. And there was a U.S. military cargo plane that got just a little bit too close, wiped out several of the apartments and ultimately crashed, and most of the people on board were killed. Two things that I found rather interesting that they deliberately did not share with us. But when we arrived in the country of Honduras, we came on a couple of different flights. And the typical way of meeting the people when you arrive on a Maranatha trip is you wear a T-shirt that Maranatha supplies with you that is representative of the country. I don't have that particular T-shirt on this morning, but I do have one that has Honduras on it. And the message on the back of the T-shirt is one that maybe I will take my jacket off during the lunch hour, and you can regard the message on the back. It's rules of the road. And if you have ever driven in some of these foreign countries, you'll recognize some of the rules that are suggested on the list on the back of my T-shirt as being very apropos. We arrived at the airport holding a large sign that says Maranatha, dressed in our green T-shirts, which is the country color. And as the various people got off the plane, you could see them as they recognized another shirt the same as they were wearing. The country is very unique. Every post has just tons of wires attached to it. Who knows where they are and where they are going? It's somewhat different than we expect over here. We boarded the small bus and we began a 4-hour drive from the capital city of Tegucigalpa to the place where we were going to be spending the next few weeks on a Maranatha trip. Like I mentioned, we did leave the week before Christmas, and we spent during the Christmas vacation and New Year's as well, and then came back around the 5th or the 6th of January. There were many people from various parts of the country. Since they had asked me to lead the group, I spent quite a little bit of time getting acquainted with another group that had been there for a few weeks and were just in the process of heading home. And they were from the Kingman, Arizona group. And they had a number of different people on that mission experience with them. And we had a lot of fun. They had a medical ministry. They had a dental ministry. Medical ministry included primarily just doing the vital signs, BP, heart rate, things like that. But they also did a blood glucose draw, and that was kind of fun. Carla, I'm going to get confused if I don't just have you go ahead and change a picture every 10 or 15 seconds or something like that so that we get through it. You can gauge it. Let's do it that way, because I get too excited when I think about mission trips that I have a hard time doing two things at once. Many of the people that were in the group from the Kingman, Arizona church were medical personnel. There were a number of physicians, and we had about 6 or 7 students that were in their final years of study at Loma Linda University, and it was very exciting to see a bunch of young people get enthused and excited about this. I am using my wife's Bible today, and when I opened the Bible up, there was a picture. And it was a picture of our granddaughter that was with us when we went on a mission trip here a few years ago. It has been my intent to try and have as many of my grandchildren experience a mission trip as well. And there was a picture of our oldest granddaughter, who is now graduating from Academy this year and has been on 3 mission trips since we first introduced her to this experience when we were in Africa. It's interesting how technology progresses. You know, they have these thermometers now where they just zap you in the ear and it gives you an instant reading about what your temperature is. These two people right there were experiencing some of this technology for the first time. It was one interesting aside when I think of this is, as we were doing the blood glucose readings, and I'm not a medical person at all, but I was pricking a lot of fingers and extracting a lot of blood and putting it in a little machine and then get the digital readout as to what the readings were. And after having done this on a couple of hundred different people, lo and behold, some of the nursing students that were there with us from Loma Linda University, I convinced them that they needed to have me prick their finger and see what their readings were. And the only person that we ran across during the entire time that I was there sticking fingers that had a dangerous glucose level, either high or low, was one of the nurses. And she had an incredibly low reading. And so the doctors immediately made some suggestions as to what she could do. Very, very interesting, wonderful people there. You ride on a bus about 45 minutes to an hour out of the little city of Choluteca, and you arrive at a small Adventist church that's in the middle of no place, really. Get off of the bus, and in a matter of minutes, we had 200 or 300 people that just came out of the woodwork, so to speak, and crowded around us, and they had long lines of people that were waiting to have their medical problems cured. And I think most of you would recognize in the few minutes that you're able to spend with them, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot for them, other than sometimes you'll give them an aspirin, or you'll give them a little bit of rather benign salve, or you'll give them a cough drop or something like that. But if there's anything significant that comes up, then of course you can refer them to further medical care. The country, as I mentioned, is very, very hot, and there's always children. Children everywhere. And so VBS is a big part of what is done when the Maranatha Volunteers Group meets over there. They have all of these various children. In a matter of minutes, again, you can have a rousing game of whatever going on the gymnasium floor, or the floor of the church, or in the classroom, or in the courtyard, and it's a lot of fun. I love children, and you can't imagine what it's like to go into an area where you are quite an anomaly, a white person, somebody that's a little, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all, please understand that. Those kids over there are incredibly lovable, cute. You can't help but want to grab hold of them and just squeeze them. And they seem to be as bright, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed kids as you'll ever see anywhere. What a wonderful experience. To sit there and to play games with them is something that I will not soon forget. The purpose of this particular trip that my wife and I were involved with, along with 46 other people, was to provide the finishing touches to a very large school complex that Maranatha has been building over the last year or two. It is a complex that has 47 buildings. Yes, 47 buildings. There are a few of them. There's evidence that I can prick people's finger and extract blood. Kevin, don't forget that. There are many, many buildings on the campus that are very modern construction, standard cinder blocks that you and I are familiar with over here. And there are a number of the structures that are also made of the one-day church type of material, where they have the small 2x2 tubing construction with a metal roof. And there's a lot of each of those. And that's my grandson on the right. He had a lot of fun over there. He had, as one of the things that he enjoyed very well, was doing some eye tests. There was a company in California that supplied us with 400 or 500 pairs of reading glasses of various strengths. And so several of the young people there, they were administering their tests. And of course, you don't speak the same language, so they put an eye chart up, and they stood back 8 or 10 feet from it, and they would see how far down that chart you could recognize the numbers and or the letters. And if you didn't get very far, they'd give you a sample of various strengths of reading glass. And then you got to keep the one where you could go down the chart the furthest in identifying the numbers and or letters. Quite a way of doing medical examinations, eye examinations over there. And it was interesting, too. You'd see some of these people that couldn't get very far. Maybe they'd recognize the big E at the top. And all of a sudden, you put a pair of reading glasses on them, and they can zip way down the chart. Big smile on their face, and then you tell them, those are your glasses. You can take them home with you. Something you have to experience in order to believe. Horses are very, very common over there. And, of course, they're very proud of their horses. There was a gentleman there that had this horse, and he rode into the campus, and he kept begging you to come over, see his horse, get up into the saddle, take pictures. And then he put the horse through the paces there, and it's a fun way of interacting with people. A number of people did take a chance or take the opportunity of climbing up in the saddle and looking around. When you meet these various people over there, you can't help but feel how blessed we are to live here in North America. They own more, or I should say less, than you and I probably have in the back seat or the trunk of your car this morning. And that's the sum total of their worldly possessions. How many of you don't even have room to have what you own in your own home? You have storage units somewhere. You have a garage. You may have another outbuilding somewhere that's just piled full of it. We traveled most of the time in some very nice buses that they had arranged for. And we did take an excursion or two where we looked at the countryside from a slightly different perspective. But much of what we did was spent actually on the building site. We stayed in a rather, by their standards, nice hotel. By our standards, you would probably say it was just a little bit on the sparse side. It certainly wasn't a 5, 4, 3, or 2-star hotel, but it was adequate. When we arrived on the scene, there were basically a cement slab and a lot of rebar that was standing up. And this gentleman that you see right here, as soon as I got there, there was something about him that I thought I recognized. And he looked at me, and in a moment he put out his hand and he said, "Richard." It was a surprise to hear him pronounce it the same way I or my brother would have pronounced my name. And sure enough, I had been in Africa with him on 2 or 3 previous trips. And he is an employee of Maranatha International and travels from around these various countries, and he's fluent in a number of different languages, but he certainly can go a long ways in helping us amateur bricklayers know exactly how to do the job and do it properly. And he's not at all hesitant, if you don't do it right, to take your bricks out and have you start again. It's a wonderful experience. We had a group meal in the hotel for breakfast every day and for the evening meal as well. But for the for the noon meal, the kitchen crew at the hotel prepared everything and brought it out on the back of a pickup truck, and that's what we did together. By the way, this is the what do you call it? This is where your clean dishes are hanging on a line. You wash your own dishes in a series of 3 rinse waters and soap, etc., and then you put them in these very porous bags and you air dry them and hang them on the line. And you have your name there on a piece of masking tape or duct tape so that you can identify your own. There was a swimming pool at the complex where we stayed, and so many of the young people that were an integral part and a very enthusiastic part of our group would take a dip in the pool in the evening. I couldn't help but take my grandson and pose with a security guard that was an ever-present force on the campus at that particular time. They patrolled, the hotel where we stayed was behind a very high brick fence, and the security guard with live ammunition in his shotgun patrolled 24 hours a day. And for his efforts, he was given $3. Now, before you say what meager wages, remember it doesn't cost nearly as much over them to survive or to live. And so at least he had a job. The country over there has a 30 to 40% unemployment rate, so at least he has a job to count on. We went to one of their churches on the first Sabbath that we were there, and to say the least, you can't help but feel proud of the way our churches look. They stand out amongst many of the other facilities, many of the other buildings that you will see there. They are clean, and the way those people sing. By the way, see the fellow in the center with his hand raised? He's 5'17", and he also came from Africa. He saved for 5 years in order to make this trip by delivering milk in glass bottles and saving every penny that he could. And when he came over to Honduras, it was the highlight of his life. And he was an integral part of our building team as well. Everything is done over there through an interpreter unless you happen to be fluent in their language. I'm still learning English, and so if I had anything to say or to convey, it had to be always done through an interpreter. Children. Like I said, I love children, and there were a plethora of them. Sweetest little things you could imagine. Iglesia Adventista do Sétimo Dia. Don't know how correctly that is pronounced, but at least that would give some of you that might understand that language an idea of where we were there. Thomas, a manufacturer of buses that we see quite a little bit over here in North America, supplied many of the vehicles that we were in there. By the way, that's an iguana that's poking his head out of a grate in the parking lot, just immediately in front of the door, the motel room my wife and I were staying. Wildlife over there, I'm an avid bird watcher, but I didn't have much time to spend looking at the birds. If I didn't have a brick and a piece of mortar in my hand, I was about to get one, because we had to move thousands of bricks from where they were dropped off by the big trucks to where we were using. By the way, this iguana is about 18 inches long, so it's not what you'd call a real runt. Rather reclusive, but he did come out and show himself from time to time, and we were able to capture him on film every once in a while when he came out. Honduras, being a tropical country, the difference in the seasons is minimal. Temperature varies very little. There is a wet season and a dry season, and we arrived there at the very end of the wet season and just at the beginning of the dry. So the country was very, very beautiful. Lush, green everywhere. When our group of 46 arrived, the other group of 20-something were just leaving. And so we had a chance to interact with them. They put on a Christmas Eve, call it a banquet or whatever you want, and we were invited to join them. They were staying in a hotel just one block down the road from where we are. But we were not allowed to walk that one block. We had to travel via the bus. They said it's just very dangerous for North Americans to be vulnerable like that in the country. And so we weren't about to challenge them and suggest, no, it's only a block, we can run down to the motel. We stayed there and rode with them on the bus. We had a very wonderful evening with them. It seems like the evenings were altogether too short. It was back to the project that brought us there in the first place, and that was building in the campus. This is for you, Kevin. You and Barry have chided me from time to time that I haven't the foggiest idea of what goes on in the kitchen. Well, there I am preparing meals. I diced more tomatoes that day than I have in my life prior to or since, probably that I will ever do again. This is our cook and two of the other ladies that assisted there. This lady is the wife of the leader that is from Guatemala, but happened to be in Honduras on this particular time. I can't say enough about my regard for the way Maranatha has approached this whole program of providing for those that don't have what we do over here. They raise funds. There are many people who have contributed to Maranatha over the years. All of the volunteers in the groups that go pay their own way, plus what they call a participation fee, which covers many of the expenses that you will incur while there, not only your meals, but even some of the building materials that you're going to be using in the construction of the project. Most of the raw materials they try and purchase locally so that it helps their economy as well. If you have been on one Maranatha trip, and by the way, Maranatha is merely one of the many supportive industries or activities that we have in the Adventist Church. There are many others. I know Barry has shared with me, he has been to Africa and has hinted that he might very well go back sometime this winter. I'm not sure whether he would invite me to go, but if he did, I might be inclined to accompany him, drilling wells for some of these people. That we take it for granted. We go over to the tap and turn it on and we get potable water, good water. It's not that way everywhere you go. So people are very fortunate when we have what we do over here. The campus that we were working on, and maybe we can just accelerate the pace at which we go through some of those pictures, and I'd just like to make a few comments. Some of the various crews that were there. A lot of students, like I mentioned, were from Loma Linda University, but we had people all the way from Toronto, many of the couple from the southern part of British Columbia, all up and down the coast. We did spend a few days on Tiger Island. I shouldn't say a few days, I should have said a few hours. Tiger Island is located about 30 minutes offshore from this country, Honduras, the town of Choluteca, and we boarded these boats. And you could see 3 different South American countries in the short half-hour drive that we took getting across these are frigate birds. Again, those of you that are interested in birds, it's not a very common bird unless you travel into the tropics. Very, very large bird and a very large forked tail. I've never seen that many frigate birds at one time, and I've seen plenty of birds in my life, but idyllic weather conditions, not a breath of air stirring, quite unlike what we have experienced during this past week, and just very nice, calm, warm conditions. While we were there, we enjoyed the tropical waters, we hiked along the beach, and we rented what they refer to as tuk-tuks, or at least that's what I call them. There are these small vehicles, they look like a tricycle with a motor in the back, and they have a bench seat behind the driver. And as you are riding in these tuk-tuks, there were, I think, 30 of them in a row, in a line, and we wound our way through the streets. There were very, very few vehicles on this particular island. But most of our time we did spend working on the construction of these buildings. This is the new entrance that they are building to this school complex. The school complex is going to accommodate 1,400 students per session, and it will have 2 sessions per day. So think of it as 2,800 young people. Some of the cement that we had, concrete still in the bag stacked up there. Gravel is always delivered, and everything that is done, you shovel the mix into the mixer, and it's all done by hand. This is the finishing touches to one of the one-day structures. This is one where we were finishing up one of the restrooms there. Fortunately, they do have adequate water. The particular property, the 10-acre piece of property, is surrounded by a very high masonry fence. And so there's a restricted access to it. Unless you have a legitimate business there, or a worker or a student, there's no way for you to get in. But the property was offered for sale, and the people that owned it had hoped to be able to make significant income after the sale of the property, but they were unable to get any water. They drilled a number of different wells, and every time it came up dry. And so Maranatha approached them, and with a contingency that they'd be able to get water, would they then be willing to negotiate on the price of the land? And the fellow said no, but he says, there's nothing there, and he says, you're wasting your time and your energy to do it. He says, you can have the property for it, and he suggested a price that was almost laughable. It was so low. Maranatha bought it, and the first well that they drilled turned out to be an exceptional well. It's on the far corner of the property, but they found an abundance of water, more than they could ever use on the facility, and so you can't deny but that the Lord does answer prayers. Going through the lunch line there, and there's the color of the, that's the country green. Whether you and I like it or not really doesn't mean a whole lot. But this is some of the meals that we had as we came back and enjoyed them from time to time at the hotel. The evening meal was always a highlight of the day. We always had a joint worship, and we had an opportunity of sharing together some of the experiences of the day. I've mentioned to you before, I believe, that I have a real soft spot in my heart for these independent ministries that are supportive in nature, and Maranatha is certainly one of them. That's another one of the young men, and might I just mention, if I could hold that picture for a second, theft is usually not a big issue. They warn you in advance, don't bring anything into the country unless you are prepared to go home without it. And that includes your fancy Nikons or Canons or you name it, your Sonys, your Canons. Just don't count on having it there when you come home. This young fellow, we were staying in the hotel together, and as a group leader there, from time to time, you have to be sure that you take care of the needs of many of the other people whose needs might be a little different than your own. He came by and he spoke to me one morning, and he said somebody went into his hotel room and stole, I think he said $450, and that's Yankee bucks. So it was significant, and he felt bad about it. He's a